And I did really, really.
So you were successful from the start?
Pretty much. You know, I had two phenomenal learning periods where I lost everything. Like I had $10,000 and went down to zero. And then I made back like $20,000 and then went down to zero. And I remember...
Are you just using these low numbers so we can understand?
No. This is when you're 22 years of age and it's 1978 or 9. That's just, you know, a gargantuan amount of money. And I remember my father coming to me on the third time and said, "You've got to get in something safe like real estate."
Exactly. Lending.
I said, "No, I'm going to stick with this." And the rest is history, but...
So anyway, just to go, so you start your hedge fund, and let me just take you to 1987. That was a big moment for you, the year of the great crash.
Well, the crash of '87 was really interesting, just because the crash of '87 probably never would have happened except for, again, the market infrastructure at that point in time. I remember, because I started out in '76 trading commodities, and so for 120 years, all commodity futures had limits. And I remember so many times in the late '70s, early '80s, where the cotton market would be limit up, or the soybean market would be limit up, because that was the allowable amount that prices could move. And they would not let them go anymore because they knew the irrationality of human nature and the possibility of what a mob can do to anything. So they had limits. Now, financial futures come along. Here's a funny story. Do you know I tried to work for Goldman in 1984? When y'all were first thinking about futures, and they went, "That's not futures. No, we're not."
Listen, I couldn't get a job.
We're not going to do that because we're Goldman. We're not going to be in that business.
I didn't get a job at Goldman. I only got a job at J. Aron.
Okay.
And J. Aron was bought by Goldman.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right, that's right. So anyway.
What is it with these Goldman guys? Stuck up.
Incredibly inflated themselves. But anyway, so '87, there were no limits. There were no limits on any financial futures. It was just an absolute accident waiting to happen. And then they started portfolio insurance. And in '87, you could just look on any kind of historical metric and see the stock market was stupidly overvalued. 10-year rates were 10.5%. And I think the dividend yield on the stock market was about 4.5 or 5. So just think about that compared to today, right? 500 basis point, we'd have 10-year rates right now at something like 7.25, 7.5.
Well, the forward prices of stock would have been a hell of a lot.
Yeah, exactly. But they weren't then. And so when the market finally broke, I mean, the one thing that I would say I've learned in the past 40 years is these, price patterns and price stories. It's the same old story so often, just with different characters, different times, different plots. And so that looked a lot like 1929 to me. And I knew for a fact that if and when it broke, because of the derivative structure, that the downside was going to be unlimited, literally unlimited, because there were no limits on futures. And I would kind of liken it to this past February's market break. We had that kind of, what was that? Was it a 7 or 8% in 1 week? And you had all the VIX ETNs, you had all the short VIX structures. Those were that was just a bomb ready to explode. That was just a matter of time. And that entire break in the first week of February was all derivative inspired. And if I think of some of the greatest financial crises of the last 30 years, they, generally speaking, are derivative inspired because that's where all the leverage is.
Leverage, right.
Yeah.
And so, I can't help but ask, you see, you've made some aspects analogous to the current position. Now, it's obviously not that bad. The interest, the return, the dividend versus interest rate isn't where it was. You see a lot of excesses in the current market?
I would say that we have, I think right now when you look at kind of any asset price, you have to be thinking that this is a highly dubious sustainable price. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, first and foremost, I don't think monetary policy, the way it's currently conducted, is sustainable over time. We have, if you think about just history is the normal real 10-year rate's 200 basis points, and right now we're probably minus 30 or 40. The normal real short-term rate's 100 to 120 basis points, and we're probably negative 40 right now. So clearly, interest rate policy is crazy. Like if you had just parachuted in and said we have a 3.8% unemployment, 2.8% CPI, what are rates? You just 4.5 or 5 or something like that. So you know rates ultimately are not sustainable because ultimately, much like the late 60s, we had Operation Twist in the 50s and 60s where we manipulated interest rates and had low real rates. And then everyone kind of in the 60s got used to zero rates, zero real rates, and that set us up for the 70s. And so I think we're doing the same thing again. So I don't think monetary policy is sustainable, and clearly fiscal policy. Are you kidding me? We're going to be 4 this year, add 0.5% every year for the next 5 or 6 years. We'll be at 7 in 3 years. That's not sustainable. So you look at prices of stocks, real estate, anything. You know in the long run that we have to get back to some type. We're going to have to mean revert back to a normal real rate of interest with a normal term premium that's existed for 250 years. We're going to have to get back to that. We're going to have to get back to a sustainable fiscal policy. And that probably means price of assets go down in the very long run. Now, the short run, it's just
lighter fluid on a fire.
I was going to say jacked up, ready to go.
Flare.
That's right.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing, but it's pouring lighter fluid on an already lit fire. Two problems with that. One is it flares, and the other problem is you don't have the lighter fluid left for when you need it. So it'll be.
So if just imagine the next recession comes.
What do you do?
Oh my God, it's going to be interesting. This will be.
Where are you going to be when that happens?
Well, hopefully I'll have been really short.
Oh yeah.
So that's a very good question. The next recession's really frightening because we don't have any stabilizers. We'll have monetary policy, which will exhaust very quickly, but we don't have any fiscal stabilizers. In 2000, the last time we were at 3.8% unemployment, we had a 2.5% budget surplus.
Yeah. I guess the hope is from the guys who are putting out the policy is that the rate of growth grows to a point where it just solves the problem. It seems like a stretch, but that's the claim.
You're laughing.
I have to say it for equal.
You could have said that to me when Reagan was president.
Yeah. Good. But okay, so listen. So we go your career as a trader, but you have another career simultaneous for which I'd have to say you are very, very famous in a narrow place, but you've had a much bigger effect on people, I would say, in your other career, which is that of a philanthropist.